Welcome to the Beware the Moon podcast. My name is Hannah, and today we're going to be talking about Poltergeist from 1982. And that's right, specifically 1982. There was, in fact, a remake of Poltergeist in the 2015 time range, but we're not talking about that one today. We're talking about the old school one, the one that I watched as a kid, and it scared the piss out of me, and it made me terrified of bathroom mirrors and swimming pools, which I had one growing up at that time, so it was pretty great experience. I was an already traumatized child, and my Nana thought it'd be great to let me watch Poltergeist, so my mom was pretty pissed about that. Anyway, talking about this movie, you've got to definitely talk about the fact, there's a couple things that you have to talk about when you're talking about this movie. You just have to, if you know anything about this movie. The first thing is that this film series is supposedly haunted. And the reason why they say that is because of some of the strange things that happen to the actors, right? Supposedly there was weird sounds on set and such. But on top of that, you had Dominique Dunne, who played Dana in this film, the oldest sister. She was axe murdered. Pretty crazy story. Ex-boyfriend who just got out of jail, dipped out of jail, shows up at her door and murders her. That's pretty traumatic, right? Pretty sad. Then you have Heather O'Rourke's death, and Heather O'Rourke is the youngest daughter in this film, Carol Ann. She died of septic shock due to congenital stenosis of the intestine, and basically what that means is she was born with a tiny intestine, so things couldn't move through her system as quickly as they needed to, and she had been complaining for a while about stomach pains, and they kept taking her to the doctor, and the doctors kept, oh, she's fine, it's just this, that, the other. They prescribed her some stuff, she'll get over it, and then she died. And it's very strange because Heather O'Rourke was young. However, I think the stranger thing about it is the reaction of everyone around her. For instance, her tomb, you can't find it. You can't find her headstone. And the reason is they went and moved her body and made it private, her resting place private, after some weird occurrences at her gravesite. And one of the directors that she had previously worked with on a TV show, someone had graffitied on one of the tomb, what are they called? A catacomb building, how they have those outbuildings. I can't think of the word right now, I'm having a brain fart, but they had graffitiing on the side of the wall that guy's name, and that he was used up, quote unquote, by Heather O'Rourke. Or Heather O'Rourke had been used up by him, rather. Sorry. So that was weird. Her family came out and said she was never molested. How dare they say that? Blah, 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 blah. Which, I'm just saying, that's a really weird reaction to be so aggressively against that idea. That tells me you either are too afraid to face reality, or you're hiding something. That's just what I've had a lot of that in my life, unfortunately, experiences where people are like, no, that would never happen, blah, 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 blah. And it was the person who trafficked me who was that aggressive about it. And then also some family members who their kids had been molested and they didn't want to look at that and think about that possibility even. So they shut that down really heavily. So because it was just a reality that was too much for them. So I think that's very weird, right? So then they had a visitor too, a strange visitor that the family would show up occasionally, and this guy would be at Heather's grave. And so they decided after the second graffiti, they were like, this is just too weird. This guy's shown up so many times. We're moving her body and we're moving the tombstone. It's just fucking weird. Which it is fucking weird that a grown man would show up to a little girl's grave and then sprint away anytime the family showed up. That is very suspicious and weird. Cannot blame them for feeling uncomfy about that. So that's kind of the deal with Heather O'Rourke. And she was alive up until the third one. It was the end of the third film when she died. They actually didn't like the original ending for that film, and so the studio demanded that they redo it. And of course nobody wanted to because they were like, we're redoing it without Heather. She's the main character basically of all three of these films. And so or she portrays the main character, rather, of these 3 films. She was a life on the set that everybody really enjoyed her presence, it seems. The director of the 3rd film was like, he felt he had a special connection to Heather. Heather really wanted to be a director, so he kind of was trying to like show her different tips and tricks and all that sort of thing. And so yeah, it's just really sad that she passed. And so when the studio demanded reshoots, they hated it. Like, the director was like, we whole-assedly phoned it in. Like, absolutely. We half-assed it because we just didn't want to be there. And another actor died, too. He's not in this film. He's the villain of the 2nd film, and actually the 3rd film as well. However, because he was so sick, I believe he was dying of cancer. He was dying of something. He was in the hospital. He agreed for them to create a plaster, like a face cast of his face, so someone could wear a mask and continue being him in the 3rd film, which I think is just super cool. And he was really down for it. Like, he was very excited that he in some form got to be part of that 3rd film still. Then on top of all of this, right, you have real skeletons used in the pool scene in this movie. And a lot of people get really freaked out by that, especially if you watch the pool scene. You're like, that's disgusting. Like, it looks like they just came out of a grave. Like, they've been buried for, like, months and months and someone brought them out. Well, the real deal with that is that, yes, those are real skeletons they used, but they were medical cadavers. And they were cheaper. It was cheaper to buy medical cadavers and make them look grotesque and, you know, decaying and rotting than it was to start from scratch and get, you know, plastered bones and things like that. So, yes, those are real skeletons. However, they don't actually look like that in real life. Like, they didn't come like they do in the movie when you watch that scene. Instead, they came as bare bone skeletons, and they decided to add onto them to make them look as creepy as they are. Then, on top of all of that, you have the clown strangling. And what that means is there's a clown in this movie, a little toy clown. And he is one of the creepiest parts of this movie. Fuck that fucking clown. But there's a scene where the clown wraps its arm around the son's neck, Robbie. And so they said to film that part, they actually would wrap the clown's arm around his neck and then kind of... and then they would, you know, have it retract, right? Because there was a mechanism where the arm would retract. And so they would wrap that around his neck and then hit the retract button and film it backwards, basically. So instead of it wrapping around, it's unwrapping. Well, one of the times they were doing that scene, that shot, something went wrong with the way the clown's arm was wrapped around Bobby's neck. And it was still constricting as if it was trying to pull the arm back in, but it was stuck around Robbie's neck. And so it was strangling the little boy actor. And Steven Spielberg, who is the producer for this movie, saw it, noticed it before anybody else on set, and rushed in and untangled the clown from the boy's neck. The boy actor says, you know, he doesn't really remember, so maybe it's real, maybe it's not, maybe it's something he was told and a memory implanted. He's not entirely sure, but supposedly that is what happened. So, there's that on top of everything else. And that's like the first one, talking about the skeletons, right? That is really what kind of perpetuated this myth of this film being cursed. And so they think, oh, because they used real skeletons and because of the subject matter of the movie, that's why Dominique Dunne was murdered. That's why Heather O'Rourke eventually died. You know, that's what created these weird happenstances on set. Clearly, like, if you want to believe in that, cool. If you don't, whatever. However, you know, whatever you decide to believe, it's very sad that Heather O'Rourke died. She was very young still. I don't think she was any older than 15. She was younger than that. Dominique Dunne, I believe, wasn't even 20. So it was it was very tragic. That's kind of the conclusion of that. Whether it's cursed or not, still fucking tragic. The other thing you really have to talk about when you're talking about this film is the director, right? So there's always been a little bit of a controversy around who actually directed this movie, which you would think would be strange, but there are circumstances, right? And basically, the circumstances are kind of like this. So Steven Spielberg, he had this idea for this movie. He really, really wanted it made. However, he was tied up by contract to, I believe, Universal. So he was not legally allowed to direct this movie because he was supposed to direct a different movie. It was something along the lines of like he had to do 3 films for such and such film company before he could direct any other films, right? He could still produce films, no problem, but he had to direct like 3 films for this specific company, and he didn't want this to be their production. He wanted it to be his own production. He wanted to be able to do what he wanted to do with it. And so instead of waiting out those 3 movies, he decided to produce this movie and produce the movie. Like he got himself a different director, and that director is actually Tobe Hooper. And if you don't know who Tobe Hooper is, he's Texas Chainsaw Massacre's the original's director. So, I mean, he picked a really good choice as far as someone who's got really good sense for horror and just lining up shots, and then also, you know, someone who knows how to make every second of the film kind of count, you know? However, because of squabbles on set, you know, Toby wanted to do things this way sometimes, and Steven wanted it that way. They said for a long time that Steven Spielberg ghost directed this movie, basically. Like, he behind the scenes directed and just had Tobe Hooper as a stand-in. Now, the actors will tell you that that's not true at all. Tobe Hooper was the director. Steven Spielberg was just there as a producer, an executive producer, doing what executive producers do, and that is telling the director how they want the film to be made. So, yeah, so very interesting there. You've got the actors who say, no, it was definitely Toby. Tobe Hooper's dead, so there's no way for us to actually know the truth, because let's say it was the case that Steven Spielberg was behind the camera for whatever reason and doing director... Blue, my dog just threw my script on the ground. That's so rude. She doesn't even give a fuck. That's so rude, dude. So let's say, you know, that is the case. Steven Spielberg would be in a lot of legal trouble, so it's not like anyone would want to admit to it, because who wants to be on Steven Spielberg's shit list for narking on him, right? But at the same time, I do believe that over time, people have looked at the different films Tobe Hooper directed, and they looked at this film and they go, no, it does definitely seem like his style and, you know, his directing choices. So that's kind of that on that. And now that we're through all of that, we're not even into spoiler territory, because I still haven't even necessarily told you what the fuck the movie's about. This movie is actually about a haunted house. It's a haunted house film. It's like the epitome of haunted house films, right? Like, if you want to name, like, you know, top 10 haunted house films, this is going to be on that list, because it's so good. And it was good when it was shot. Some of the effects now are a little hokey, because this was done in 1982. However, I think a lot of them still hold up, and I think a lot of the scares and the ideas behind them still hold up, and a lot of the acting is really well. It's really good. Like, you can't deny that these actors didn't give it 100%, because it's fucking good. And a lot of the actors are actually still alive. Well, there's this little lady who has a really strange voice. She's dead. The dad is actually... he's Mr. Incredible. And then the mom is also alive as well. It's crazy because the kids in this film, like, you have to think that Robbie at some point was like, am I gonna be next? What the fuck? Because, I mean, the older sister's the first to die, then Heather O'Rourke dies, and so he's like, my odds are not looking good, probably, you know, he's got to be thinking that at some point. But anyway, this film is a haunted house film. Family lives in house starts doing weird things. The daughter disappears, and they're trying to get her back. And it's because they suck her into, like, the ether, the other side, what have you. So, that's the gist of the story. And now we can finally move on to the real spoilers. So, it's so funny, because when we were watching this movie again, I was watching it with my mom. It's one of the few horror movies she will actually watch. And so it starts with the national anthem of America. And so... I remember thinking, like, why is it doing that? And then I go, oh yeah, because I've had it explained to me before, but I'm like, kids these days would not know that TV stopped at midnight back in those days, back in the 80s, Midnight, your television would play the national anthem, didn't matter what channel you were on, and then it would shut off and turn to static until, normal times, 7 a.m., 6 a.m., what have you, the next day. So that's what we start with, and we get this cute little dog patrol. It's a great way to just set up kind of who these people are. You get a little bit of character background as the dog does this, He's going around, he's trying to find food. It's really funny. He finds like a bag of chips in the oldest daughter's bed and runs off with that. And then we get the youngest daughter wakes up and she hears the static and she goes to the static and she starts talking to the static. And she's wakes up the whole fucking house because she's like, I can't hear you. And I was like, if that were my little sibling, I'd be like, shut the fuck up, and then go back to sleep. But everybody comes out to see what she's yelling about, which is crazy. And then the next day, you've got just some more character setup stuff, some more background stuff, just to show you what kind of neighborhood this is and what kind of life they live. This guy's on a beer run on his bike, and he gets to the family's house, and they're trying to watch TV. They're trying to watch the football game, and all of a sudden the channel changes to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And it's because this is like the wildest thing to imagine now, right? But it's because the neighbor's TV set is on the same wall that their TV set is on, and so when they both go to use their clicker, it'll change the other person's TV channel too. So it's just like some fun background stuff about like the technology of that time and all that. Like, it's just so fun to look at now, I think, because like that would never fucking happen today. Like, you have your phone, like a lot of people have their TV channels and stuff hooked to their phone so they can change it from their phone. Just wild. But anyway, we see the mom's cleaning, and she looks at the bird's bird cage, and inside the bird is dead, and she goes, "Oh, Tweety, couldn't you have waited for a school day?" And I was like, that's so funny. And then the mom goes to flush Tweety down the toilet, and Carol Ann, the youngest daughter, sees her and gasps, and it's such cute little kid acting. Like, it's so good. So then they have to have a funeral for Tweety. They put Tweety in a cigar box, and they go bury Tweety, and it's so funny because as soon as they're done burying Tweety, Carol Ann goes, "Can I get a goldfish?" And you're like, yep, that's kids, man. That's kids. We also see the nightmare tree, and so there's like this evil tree basically that freaks out the son. He's not the youngest son, he's just the son. But it freaks him out a lot. And looking at the tree now that I'm older, I'm like, that whole tree is fake. It's a fake tree. It's specifically tailored for the movie's expectations and what they want to do with it. Like, you can see there's a part in the bark where like at some point it's gonna open up, and you can just see that already. And so like, me just being someone who picks apart movies and horror movies and stuff, I was like, that's so cool that you can see that. Like, I don't know, just thought it was cool. Especially I had nightmares about that tree myself growing up. Like, that tree scared the fuck out of me, and we'll get to why in a little bit, I promise. Anyway, that night they're like tucking in the kids. There's a storm coming. Carol Ann's like, the closet light. So they turn on the closet light. And so the kids, like, they tuck in the kids. Dana, it's so funny. She's like on the phone still, which I think is hilarious. That's such an 80s thing, is like being on the phone, late at night with your friends, trying to hide the fact that you're on the phone. Like, I don't know. I just feel like kids these days don't really. Like, they can just text quietly and stuff. I don't know. But anyway, a guy named Joe is playing on the television in the parents' bedroom. And that's interesting because a guy named Joe is about a pilot who dies and is trying to help guide another pilot through his journey as a pilot. Just very interesting choice. And then he's reading a Reagan book, Reagan the Man, the President, or whatever it's called. And they're rolling joints, and they're talking about like getting a swimming pool because they're about to start construction on a swimming pool in their backyard. And I think too it's very interesting because of course it's 1982. Reagan is a big thing. Reaganism, talking about the nuclear family and all that stuff. And at that time, there's this expected ideal for the ideal life. The mom is a stay-at-home mom, the dad is a salesman, and he's really good at his job, and so they have this nice house, and it is a nice house. I fucking love this house. I wish I had a house like this. It's so fucking cool. But especially the stairway in the living room, just really neat. Anyway, but and also you've got your mom, your dad, they're married, they've got kids, and so that's like the ideal for Reaganism, right? And that's like the ideal family dynamic at that time, and that's the ideal American dream at that time. And so you have to watch this movie. At some point you're watching it and you're thinking, this must be some kind of criticism against Reaganism. But I think at the end of the day, it's more of a criticism against the materialistic aspects of Reaganism versus the nuclear family. Because at the end of the day, the fact that this family is a family, and the fact that this family like loves each other and is there for each other, like the mom and the dad band together to help their family, even though they're just normal people. Like I said, they're rolling joints, they're smoking doobies in this scene, and so they're just your average Joes, and they still band together to save their kids and save their family. And so I don't think it's necessarily a criticism of all of Reaganism, because at the end of the day, the facts is the parents get to be the heroes in this film. And I think getting older, just as I get older, I think that that's a really fun aspect of this film, because usually it's some outside force and it's some specialized unit, and in this film, that's none of that. Like, they need help from specialized units and they need help from certain people, but at the end of the day, it's them that saves their kid. They're the ones who buck up and are strong enough and are brave enough to save their family, and they do the right thing by their family. And so I think it's not necessarily a critique of all of Reaganism. It's more of what is actually the most important aspect of your life, and that is to have a family, like to have people who are there for you. Very nice. Just very cool aspect of this film that I didn't appreciate when I was younger. Anyway, parents are smoking doobies, talking about the pool. Mom's fretting, what if Carol Ann sleepwalks into the pool and drowns? And so they're having that discussion. Meanwhile, we get Robbie's clown's first appearance, and Robbie clearly does not like this fucker. And to me, I'm like, why do you even have this? Why would anyone buy this, let alone put it in their kids' room, like their young children's room? It's freaky. It's got like a plastic type face, and then it's like cloth and stuff, the body and everything, but like, he just has that freaky fucking clown face. And so Robbie tries to throw a blanket over him and he misses. And then you can see like he's just getting progressively more freaked out. So it cuts to the parents in the bedroom, and we're having some like the dad's doing a Donald Duck impression and also doing foreplay. So I'm like, I don't know, man. Maybe that's what married people do. I'm not a married people. I have no idea. But Robbie interrupts them, and he tells the dad about the tree. And I thought it was interesting because I caught the fact that he says, it looks at me and knows I live here. And you're like, that's a weird fucking thing to say about a tree, kid. Like, what? But the dad doesn't, the dad just, he does his dad thing. He's like, let's go. He gives him a piggyback ride. He goes and he tucks him back in. And they're doing the lightning counting, there's the lightning, and then you count, and then there's the thunder, and that's how far away it is. And so I think it's funny because like this, I always thought it was like per second, that's how many miles away it is. I don't know if that's true or not. This film doesn't make any claims about that. He just says it's getting further if there's more seconds, and it's coming closer if there's less seconds. So like, pretty easy to just tell. And I'm like, that's a smart way of doing it, because I was always told it was a mile, and then I heard no, it wasn't. Who the fuck cares? What matters is it's getting further away, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, Carol Ann, she has this little toy phone, and I was like, this is the original Skinamarink, man. Like, Poltergeist tried to make those toy phones freaky before Skinamarink was ever even imagined. She's got this little toy phone, and she goes, Daddy, it's for you. And he says, well, tell him to take a message, sweetie. And so she goes, my daddy wants to take a message. And it's super cute. But then I remembered in the second Poltergeist, that's like a bigger thing, is that toy phone. So you have the dad trying to give him the lightning counting. At some point, like, we see Robbie just gets too freaked out, and then we cut to the kids are in bed with the parents, and then the TV's playing the anthem, and then it goes to static, and then there's like this beam of light that shoots out of the TV, and the dog is like watching this happen. There's a beam of light that shoots out of the TV and makes a hole above the bed. And then there's an earthquake, and E-Buzz, the dog, is just freaking the fuck out. He's barking and freaking. And then at some point, Carol Ann is like, they're here, because she gets out of bed and goes to, like, also check out, like, the static and stuff. So she says they're here, which this is the line that everybody, it's one of those Mandela effects. Everybody thinks she says they're back, but she says they're here. And so that's the actual line. The other Mandela effect with this movie, which is very interesting, is there's a scene where they're talking about the graveyard, and the boss says it's not like it's an Indian burial ground, it's just people. And so people think, for whatever reason, that, like, oh, it's an Indian burial ground and that's why the haunting happens. But no, that's not it. That's the other Mandela effect of that is, like, in this movie, which it's strange that there's two. But, yeah, people think that the root cause of it is Indian burial ground, and that's not true at all. Really crazy. But anyhow, the next morning is, like, utter chaos. Because you got the construction guys out back digging for the pool. You've got the dad on the phone talking about the storm. You've got the daughter and the kid. Like, all the kids are trying to eat, and it's so cute because, like, you can tell that, like, these two kids playing siblings, the kid actors, you know, Heather O'Rourke and then Robbie, they, like, they're like passing insults back and forth, and it's so funny because at one point he's like, you're a barf bag, and she's like, you're a doggy bag, and the mom goes, good one, sweetie. And you're like, what the it's just such a fun moment. And then the older sister gets into it too, and then her glass breaks, her glass of milk breaks, and for whatever reason she blames the younger brother. She's like, thanks a lot, jerko, I've got class in 10 minutes, and he's just like, it wasn't me. And, like, yeah, how the fuck would he have done that? But anyway, she gets up and she leaves. The daughter does. She goes to school on a bike, apparently. And as she's leaving, there's, like, a lot of people are really uncomfortable with this scene because the construction workers, like, sexually harass her. And, like, in real life, she is underage. And then also in the movie, she's underage. So you're like, this is just, like, different times, man. Like, it's the 80s. You're gonna have that in a lot of horror movies. It's very minimal. It's not like they're grabbing her ass or anything. They're just catcalling her, and then she gives them the finger and basically tells them to fuck off and everything, and they're laughing at her and they think it's hilarious and cute. And I'm just like, that's so weird. But don't let that interrupt your enjoyment of the movie. Like, it's very brief, then we move on. And it's so funny because later on, like, Dana does kind of, like, low-key confirm she's sexually active, and so you're like, I mean, it's still weird, but it's just a weird thing because it's the 80s, like, and that's not, like, to excuse it. Like, it's still disgusting behavior. It's just, it's the 80s, and like I said, don't let it, you know, ruin your enjoyment of the movie. But then we have the utensils in the house as well. Like, they all bend, so the mom goes to, like, pick them up, and they're all bent, and she's like, what the hell? And then E-Buzz, the mom's cleaning later, and E-Buzz is, like, barking at the hole in the wall. He brings it a toy, and I was like, oh, he's trying to, like, offer them. He's like, please, make peace with my family. Take my favorite toy. Don't hurt my family. And you're like, oh, what a good boy. He's, like, he literally, like, gets up on his hind legs and is, like, begging at the hole in the wall. And I was like, oh, what a good little man. He's trying to protect his family. But the mom sees it, and it's just like, what a fucking weirdo. And then we also get, like, Carol Ann is, like, watching a static channel, like, really close. And it's so funny because the mom's like, you're gonna hurt your eyes, sweetie, and switches it to, like, cowboys shooting people. And I was like, she didn't even check to see what was playing. She didn't give a fuck. It's so funny to me. But then the mom turns around and, like, the shot follows the mom, and we come back, the mom gasps and drops whatever she's holding, and the chairs, which she had already put up, like, she had already, like, tucked them in because, like, they had all been shoved out, like, a foot from the table, so she went and tucked the chairs back in, and now they're stacked up on the table, and only I mean, the construction workers are there, but they're outside. So it's just her and Carol Ann in the house. She looks at Carol Ann and she goes, TV people? And Carol Ann, like, nods. And then Carol Ann, she asks Carol Ann if she can see them, and she says no. But very, very strange. Like, if that were me, I'd be freaking the fuck out. But fast forward to Steve is coming home, and the second he pulls up, Diane, the mom, rushes out to grab him and basically, like, drags him into the kitchen. She's like, I gotta show you something. I gotta show you before it stops again. So she puts the chair, there's, like, you can see she's got it, like, outlined with chalk or something on the floor. So she puts the chair in the circle, and the chair slides down the kitchen. And you can see Steve is just like, what? And so he walks over and he's, like, checking for string and checking to see, like, if there's a pulley system in place. So then the wife, Diane, puts Carol Ann in the circle with, like, a helmet on. And she tells Steve, she's like, stay down there a second. So she puts Carol Ann in the circle, and Carol Ann slides. And the mom is, like, ecstatic. She thinks that's so cool. And so she's like, Steve, come try it. And he's like, nope. And she's like, there's, like, a tickling in your belly, and it kind of, like, pulls you. And so she's like, you're not going to try it? And he's like, no. So then Diane and Steve go to the next door neighbor and ask him if he's had anything weird happening. And, like, the whole time they're being attacked by mosquitoes. They're, like, smacking, you know, different spots on them. They think it's mosquitoes. And he's like, not been bit by a single mosquito. I don't think anybody in my family has. And then they're like, is there anything weird going on? And he's like, it just cuts, so you know he was like, what the fuck, basically. And so they're talking to each other, Steve and Diane, and she's like, I mean, what are we even gonna do about this? Like, she's like, I've lived with it all day. It's totally fine. It's not dangerous. And he's like, no one is going into the kitchen until I figure out what is going on in there. And she's like, I mean, how are we even going to do that? Like, who do we even call? I checked the yellow pages. It's not like there's listening for weird activity. So, like, what are we even going to do about it? But that night, there's another storm. And it's absolutely fucking nuts because the tree comes through the two little ones share a room, and the tree comes through the window and grabs Robbie with its branches and starts eating him. Like I said, there's a part of that tree that comes open, and so it flaps open a little bit, and the tree puts Robbie in its mouth and it starts eating him. And Steve, like, it's so cool because, like, I don't know, like I said, I just think it's great that it's like the nuclear family saves the day, basically. And, like, that includes the dad. The dad does a lot of these brave tasks. I mean, the mom does too, but, like, Steve's the one, he climbs the tree and he grabs Robbie out of its mouth and pulls him out. And, like, as that's happening, Carol Ann gets sucked into the closet. So you have them not focused on Carol Ann at all because she's in the room. She gets sucked into the closet. And then once they get Robbie out of the tree, a tornado comes through and picks the tree up and takes it away. And then they're like, holy shit. And they're like, that must have just barely brushed by us. And so they're like, where's Carol Ann? So they go rush off to find Carol Ann because they left her all alone. And now even, like, Dana is outside of the house now. So they all rush in to try and find Carol Ann. And the bedroom is, like, obviously a huge mess. And, like, the closet had sucked in a lot of things. So they're, like, throwing the beds out of the closet that got sucked in there. They're trying to move everything really fast. And then you see there's, like, this person laying under a blanket. And so they're not moving. So Diane starts crying a little bit. And Steve pulls the blanket off. And it's just the fucking clown. That fucking asshole. So then they're like, oh, relieved. And then they're like, but actually, where's Carol Ann? Like, we still don't even know. So they start running around looking for Carol Ann. And finally, Robbie starts yelling for them because he's in front of, like, the static TV. And so Carol Ann starts talking, and it's, like, garbled, and she's in the fucking TV. So then we cut to, finally they have found someone. They're at a university. Steve's doing this interview with this group of people, and it's a lady, and she's a doctor, a psychologist. I was going to say psychologist. Anyway. And then her two cohorts, she's got Marty, who is a guy wearing glasses, and she's got Ryan, who is he's a really cool black dude. I just like Ryan's character. He's very brave. Like, nothing really seems to spook him too bad, whereas Marty's a little bit of a wimp. But they're having this interview, and she's like, would you guys welcome us to come and like look at these disturbances, blah blah blah. And he says to her, like, we don't care about the disturbances, we don't care about the noises or the lights or the music, we just want our daughter back. And so as they're like he's like takes them to the house, and they're like, you know, how often is stuff happening in the room? And he says, we don't go into the room anymore. And she's like, oh, okay. And she's like, well, how often are there disturbances in the room? And he says, we don't go in the room anymore. And she's like, Ryan once took a video of a car moving, and he was like, yes, the car traveled a distance of X amount of feet, and, you know, blah, 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 over the course of 7 hours. It was completely invisible to the naked eye, but I caught it on time lapse. And Steve's just so unimpressed. He's like, huh. So then he opens the door for them, and it's a fucking madhouse. The beds are spinning. There's shit flying through the air. You get the Incredible Hulk on a little donkey riding a horse or whatever the fuck. And then you have like one of those old school compasses with the needle on it. It zooms in at them, and then it touches like a record, and the record starts spinning, so it starts playing music, and they're just like stunned. It cuts to they're in the kitchen now, and the psychologist, she's like shaking as she's trying to drink tea from her teacup. And so yeah, that kind of answers her question, you know. Then they start talking about a poltergeist versus a haunting, and they're like, this is interesting to me because the movie is called Poltergeist, but this is clearly a haunting based off of what she says, right? Like, she says poltergeist is just, you know, it's usually latches onto one person, and it's a short burst of time, and then it goes away, whereas a haunting usually has to do with a location, and it doesn't stop usually. And so the mom freaks out, Diane, and she's like, you mean this could all stop at any second? Like, we could just not have access to Carol Ann anymore? We need to get her back. Like, what the fuck? And I think, too, like I said, it's funny because, like, the movie's called Poltergeist, but according to that explanation, this is a haunting. Especially when we get to the end of the movie, you're like, yeah, it was definitely a haunting. But anyway, they try and have a chat with Carol Ann. The doctor is like, can you communicate with her? And they're like, sometimes. So they have to turn on the staticky TV, and they start talking to Carol Ann, and it's like a really sweet moment. But then Carol Ann's describing shit that's happening, and she describes this light, and they're like, stay away from the light. The ceiling spits watches and shit. Like, it just spits out a bunch of items, and they're like, what the fuck? Someone's coming for Carol Ann. There's like a lot of thumping, and so everybody starts freaking out because like the thumping is all throughout the house, and Carol Ann's like, they're coming, and they're like, freaking out, and she's like, leave my daughter alone, she's just a baby, you bastards. And then all of a sudden there's like a blast of wind, and the mom is like, it's Carol Ann, she moved through me, she moved through my spirit, like I can smell her on my clothes. And so like it's like a really cool moment, but then like spooky shit happens. There's like growling and flashes of light, and then Marty comes down from upstairs, and he's like, because tries to get into that room, and he's like, something took a bite out of me, and poor Robbie's like, what? It's so cute. He has such a good, like, I think they cast Robbie based on just his distressed expression alone, because it's so good. But because something took a bite out of Marty, Steve wants everybody to go. Diane refuses. Dana says, bye. She's like, I'm out, bitch. I'm not staying here. And they're like, that's fine. But Robbie also decides to stay. And I think at this point, like, off screen sometime, they call Diane's mom to come get Robbie the next day. So then, like, night falls. The doctor has like a little powwow with Diane, and it's really sweet. And then Robbie joins the discussion, because he's just curious about like death. Like, he's a kid, and he's like, all these people are like, there's so many dead people in my house now, supposedly, and I don't even understand death. So they had like a chat about that. And so they come to this conclusion, though, like the doctor does, that if there's a way out, there must be a way in. So that said, they're like, probably that closet's the way in, and clearly the living room is the way out, because I mean it just spat out a bunch of shit. So at some point in the night, and this is really cool too, like a detail I didn't notice, is that Robbie during their discussion has this idea of like, well, if you put a rope around me and I go into the closet, I can grab Caroline and then we can come out and blah blah blah, and you could just pull me out if, like, for whatever reason things go bad. And so that's kind of where they get the idea that they eventually like use, is Robbie. And I was like, good for him, good job, little man, look at you and your strategery. But that night, as they're like, everybody's asleep except Ryan and Marty, and so Marty says to Ryan, like, hey, I'm gonna go grab something to eat. So he goes into the kitchen, he starts eating a chicken wing, and he puts a steak on the counter because he's about to like cook it up, and the steak starts like crawling, like, it starts like worming its way across the counter, and then it just like, it's the inside of it explodes outward, and it just keeps like, it's like this mess of like goop, just like I don't even know how to describe it, like, it's so disgusting. And then he drops the chicken out of his mouth, and he looks down, and there's maggots coming out of the chicken wing. So then Marty's like, fuck that. He goes into the bathroom, starts throwing up into the sink, and then the light changes. And this scene freaked the fuck out of me as a kid. For like a long time, I refused to look in the mirror when I was in the bathroom. I would just stare at the drain. But then I accidentally saw that scene in It where the little kid's talking to the girl in the drain, and then it's the clown, and then the blood explodes out of the drain. And so then that didn't work for me anymore, and I was just very traumatized. I hated the bathroom as a child. But anyway, Marty's there, and this is an interesting scene because he's looking in the mirror, and he goes to touch his face, and it starts peeling away, and he starts peeling his skin, and his eyeballs start coming down, and you could see like his teeth and everything. And an interesting fact is, this prop that they had to do this physical effect, this practical effect, that they only had the one, and they couldn't afford another shot with it. So Steven Spielberg was like, I know how I want it done. I know how I want it to look. I'll do it. So he wore the cast, basically. It was like a face on top of his face, basically. And he wore the practical effect and did it himself, instead of having the actor from Marty do it, which I think is just a really fun behind-the-scenes fact. And as this is happening, Ryan, who's in the living room doing a really cool doodle, like it's a really good little sketch, he's not paying attention, and so his camera turns to the stairwell, and there's like a glow from upstairs, and finally when Marty comes back, he makes Ryan focus up, and all kinds of people show up, and they disappear in a flash. And so the doctor's like, roll it back, and you can see like the silhouette outlines in the camera and the footage of like the different people who were standing there, and Robbie's like, who are all those people? It's so cute. So then the next day, by Robbie, a cab comes to take him to his grandma's, and he goes, and then E-Buzz goes to the dog, and it's so cute because E-Buzz like walks halfway to the cab and then looks back, and then the mom is kind of like, go on, and so then he goes into the cab, and I was like, oh, he wanted to stay and protect his family. But the doc in the meantime is inside. She's checking out the stuff that got spat out from the ceiling, and she's like, this is from just 10 years ago. This is from like 150 years ago. And so she's like, I'm going to go take this and put this, I have to display all this at the university. I hope you understand. And they're like, just so long as it's not on like 60 Minutes or something. And then at that time, like, she's like, I have to leave, but I'm leaving Ryan with you. And I'm going to go get some help. And I'll be back. Ryan will be back, actually, because I think Ryan does leave for a bit. But she's like, I'll be back. Ryan will be back. Marty will not be back. He said, fuck that shit, after his face fell off in the bathroom. So, but she's like, I've got someone who I can call, and I think she'll be able to help us. And so Diane's like, so grateful. And the doc leaves. And then Steve's boss shows up. And here's the deal with Steve's job. He lives in this neighborhood. It is a development community thing. Like, it's got an HOA, all that bullshit. So his boss is part of the company that developed all these houses. And Steve works to sell these houses. So even though he lives in one, he's basically sold over like 50% of these properties. He was the salesman for them. And so his boss shows up because he's like worried about him. He's like, we really don't want to lose you. And it's so funny because Steve's boss is one of the guys from Return of the Living Dead. I forget his name, but he's just a really goofy, fun character actor. And so the boss, he's like, you want to take a walk with me? And it's so funny too, because as soon as the boss shows up, crazy shit starts happening in the house. Like the piano starts moving, and Steve's like calmly trying to get him to not notice and get him out of the house. And then they're standing outside, and the light for the porch goes really, really bright. And he's like, "Are you trying to attract every mosquito in a 10-mile radius?" And so then Mr. Teague is the boss's name. He brings Steve somewhere, and as they're walking up this hill, he brings up Carol Ann, and he points out that she was born in that house. Carol Ann was. And so I think that that's a really like important aspect. That's why they connect with her, because this is their resting place. She was born here, and so like her spirit was born around these other spirits. And it's so funny though, because he's like, "Oh yeah, she was born in the house," and then he goes, "I didn't see her," and Steve goes, "She's around." So then they're up on top of this hill overlooking the valley, and Teague offers to move him to the top of this hill. He's like, "You can have a bay window overlooking the whole valley." And he's like just blown away by Teague's offer, because it's a really good offer. Because he offers him that and other things, and he's like, "We just don't want to lose you to a different company." And so they turn around, and there's a cemetery there, and he's like, so Steve's like, "What are we going to do with all this?" And he's like, "Oh, we just move the cemetery." And he was like, "Move the cemetery?" And he's like, "Yeah, we've done it before." He was like, "What?" So Steve's like, when? I didn't hear about this." And he's like, "Well, it's not really the kind of thing you advertise about when you're trying to sell houses that, oh, your house was built on what used to be a cemetery." He's like, "We just moved everybody out. Like, no big deal. They're down, 10 miles down the road, 10 minutes away or whatever it is." And he's like, there is what's the problem with that? And so he's like, "I don't know." He goes, "Who could have a problem with that?" And he's like, this is the part where he's like, "It's not ancient tribal burial ground, it's just people." And so he, like I said, he says they've done it before, and Steve's like, "Are you sure you're allowed to do that?" And he's like, "Why wouldn't we?" And he's like, "I don't know, maybe someone has a problem with it." And he was like, "Who?" And he was like, "I don't know, whoever would complain." And he's like, "We've never had a complaint until now." And so like, it's so funny because to Teague, he's talking about like real life people, like real reality, and for Steve, he's thinking about the situation at his house. And so it's just like a really fun, like double meaning conversation that kind of, it connects a lot of dots. And so it's really clever, and I love it. Very, like I said, very good tight script writing right there. So then when Steve comes home, there's the little sidekick lady. She got these big old glasses, and she's really tiny, and she's got this weird voice. And Steve, of course, thinks she's full of shit. But he's like trying to test her and everything. And so when he explains quietly, he's downstairs, she's upstairs. He's trying to explain to the doctor and to Diane that he's trying to test her. And she shouts from upstairs to respond to him. And she shuts his ass down. And it's a really fun moment. And so the tiny psychic lady, it's so funny because she's trying to talk to them. And she tells Diane, she's like, "Why don't you come kneel down here? You're gonna give me whiplash looking up at you like that." And so they all end up kneeling in front of her. It's like this, like they're kindergartners. It's so cute to me. It's like a little powwow. But she makes Diane promise that, she'll be strong and she'll do whatever the little tiny psychic lady says, even if it's against her beliefs as a Christian. And that's kind of weird, but she's like, "Yeah, I agree." Because she's like, "We can get your daughter back." She explains why they took Carol Ann, and then she explains how they're going to get her back. And basically, Carol Ann is a symbol of light and life and love. She was born in this house. It's like the fact of her youthfulness, and then also her love and her love for her family is what makes her such a strong beacon to these dead people. And so it's kind of like a false light. They're supposed to go into the light to pass on, but because Carol Ann's light is so bright, that's what they've been clinging to instead. And so the psychic, she's like, she's only going to hear your voice, Diane. So she says that even though there's like all these dead people that are really attracted to Carol Ann, there's also an evil presence that keeps Carol Ann close. And she says to Carol Ann, it's just another child, but to us, it's the beast. And so they get everything ready for like the plan. They get tennis balls and Ryan writes numbers on them. They get rope. She's like, did you run the bath water? Yeah, I ran the bath water. And she's like, all right, call to her, Diane. So Diane tries talking to Carol Ann, and the psychic lady says she's under restraint. And so she's like, which one of you is the authority figure in this house? And Diane's like, Steve decides the punishments. And so she's like, Steve, I need you to call out to her. And poor Steve is like, that's not fair. And she's like, I need you to call out to her. I need you to get stern with her. I need you to get mad. I need you to sound firm. Tell her you're going to give her a spanking. He's like, I've never spanked the kids before. And she's like, tell her you're going to give her a spanking. If she doesn't answer you, make her answer you. So he does. And so they get Carol Ann to like gather the dead people and then lead them on, basically. And then the plan is, because she's so close to the light, she's so close to that entrance in the house, they decide they're going to tie a rope around Diane. Steve wants to do it, but Diane's like, no, I need you here in case something goes wrong. I need you to pull me out. You're the only one strong enough to do that. Like, this little psychic lady and this old doctor lady, they're not going to be able to help me. I need you here. So she says, don't let go. And he says, never. And it's so sweet. So that's the other thing about them as like parents and a couple, is they really love each other and they really love their family. They're just one of the best like horror movie couples. And this is one of the greatest horror movie families to me personally. So anyway, like the little psychic lady was like, I'll go in. And Diane's like, she's not going to come to you. You're a stranger. And she's like, you're right, you should go. So then Diane ties the rope around herself, goes into the closet, comes out the living room with Carol Ann. They're not responsive, and Steve is freaking out. And so the little psychic lady's like, get her into the bathwater. So they throw him in the bathwater. They're covered in all this nasty goop, but they're in the bathwater, and suddenly they both kind of like start breathing. And Carol Ann is so cute. She just looks at her dad and goes, hi, Daddy. And he's just like so relieved, and they're all so relieved, and it's so happy. And the little psychic lady goes, this house is clean. And you're like, all right, cool. So then everybody decides, like Steve is like, fuck this, we're moving, we're getting out of this house, fuck this place. And so he's like, fuck this job, fuck my boss, fuck all of this, we're going. So like it cuts to them packing up to leave, and it's so funny because it's Atlas van lines, and I'm like, oh, they're still in business, that's crazy. But she's like, Teague's not going to take no for an answer. And he goes, I know. She goes, so what are you going to do? And he's like, I'm going to tell him to go to hell. And she's like, he's not going to go to hell. And he's like, that's why I'm going to give him a map, basically. And so he's like, if I'm not back, so she's like, we're really leaving tonight. Like, that's for sure, we're leaving tonight. And he was like, yes, we're not staying another fucking night in this house. We are leaving tonight. And Diane had told Dana, because Dana goes off with a friend, she was like, oh, we're going to be staying at the Holiday Inn off of such and such highway. And she goes, oh, I remember that place. And Diane goes, what? And she's like, nothing. Bye. See you later. So, that happens. Steve's like, if I'm not home, just let the kids take a nap, but we're leaving tonight. We're not staying another night in this fucking house. And so Diane's like, all right, bet. So that night, right, the mom takes a bath. The kids are settled down. They're trying to go to sleep. Then the fucking clown is there, and Rob, I don't know why they have it still. Why do they have this? Why? Because the clown is sitting in its chair, and Robbie looks over at it and is like, and then he like goes to go throw something over it, and it's gone. And I'm telling you, lads, I would shit my pants. Fuck that. Fuck that. I would be screaming. I'd be yelling. I'd be doing something. I'd be like, this fucking clown is after me. Bitches, everybody wake up. So the clown, he looks under the bed, which I would not do that. Like I said, I would shit myself and then be screaming. But Robbie decides to look under the bed, and the clown comes at him, and it grabs him, and it drags him under the bed, and Carol Ann's screaming now, and Robbie's fighting off the clown, and finally he gets the clown off of him, and he just starts, I hate you! I hate you! And he starts, like, pulling the stuffing out of this clown, and I'm like, you go, Robbie, you kill that motherfucker, you get it. And while that's happening, Mom is on the bed, and she gets dragged from the bed to the wall up the ceiling. And there's actually, they weren't able to do what they really wanted to do in this scene because they wanted like tentacles grabbing her, but they just weren't able to like figure it into their budget, I think is what it was. Or else they would have had tentacles grabbing her instead of her just magically upping her way up the ceiling and stuff. So the closet awakens as that's happening to the mom, and it's always so damn angry. So it opens and it's hungry, and poor Carol Ann goes, not again, and it starts trying to suck in the kids. And so the mom hears them screaming. She knows shit's happening. She tries to like go help them, but then I think her hand burns on the knob, and then this giant skeleton beast thing, it's so fucking cool looking, it pops up and it starts roaring at her, and she gets like knocked ghostily down the stairs. So then she's like, I have to go get help. So she runs outside and screaming for help. The pool has been dug out, but it's not been finished yet. So there's basically this giant hole, and now it's got water in the bottom of the deep end because it's slanted and everything, and then also like it's raining, so she accidentally falls in there, and that's when you get the skeleton scene. So all these skeletons starts popping out of this pool, and they're like up in her face, and their mouths are open, and she's screaming at them. She was not told, by the way, this actress, she was not told that those were real skeletons, but didn't really matter because they just looked really freaky. So and to her it wasn't like a big deal when she found out later on. Like, she found out the deal that they were cadavers and they were made up to look like that. And she's like, oh, okay, so it wasn't like I was touching rotting corpses. It's just skeletons. But she freaks out, the mom does, and she tries to pull herself out of the pool. Coffins are popping up all over the place. It's crazy. They're just sprouting out of there like fucking weeds. Everything is mud. She's trying her best to get up, but it's so muddy. She slips back down, and then shout out to the neighbors for 2 seconds because they pull her out of the pool. And she's like, Ben, come with me, I have to get my kids. And he's like, no. And I'm like, you know what? They pulled you out of the pool. I get it. You know, like, fuck that. I don't know what's going on in there. It's like, looks like a fucking rave in your house. Everybody's screaming. There's skeletons in your pool. Like, I'm not helping you any further. So, the neighbors just peace out. Like, luckily they were there for that 2 seconds. Diane goes back in. The hallway starts like stretching. And I wrote, the closet is hell's anus, because that's basically what it looks like. It's trying to eat them. It's hell's anus. There's like intestinal looking stuff in the closet now. The kids are being sucked into the closet, or the closet's trying to suck them in. Diane opens the door. She's got to hold onto the door frame because it's trying to suck her in. She grabs the kids, pulls them out, and then Steve pulls up, and his house is a fucking rave, and he's like, what the fuck? So the front door, he goes to the front door, and it opens, and it's Diane and the kids, and then like coffins pop up out of the ground to separate the two. Like, they can't physically make it to each other, and Diane's like, Steve, help us, and then the door closes, and so Steve's pissed. So he confronts Teague, because Teague followed him home. Like, literally, when she was like, he's not going to take no for an answer, he really isn't. Like, that motherfucker followed Steve home. And so he's standing right there, and that's when we get Steve grabbing him by the collar. It's one of my favorite shots. And he's like, you son of a bitch! You only moved the headstones, but you left the bodies, didn't you? You only moved the headstones! And then there's like, Teague makes some weird screaming sound. This poor guy has no idea what's happening, you know what I'm saying? And he's just yelling about bodies and headstones, and there's a rave happening at his house, and there's coffins popping up everywhere. This would be absolutely fucked to walk up on. Like, what is happening? So then the family comes out from behind the house. They go out the back door and run to the front. Steve drives them away, and just before he does, Diana pulls up, and she just starts screaming, and Robbie's like, they're like, get in the car! And it's so funny to me because she pulls up, gets out of her friend's car and starts, what is happening? And they're just like, get the fuck in the car, basically. And then she's in the car and Steve's trying to pull away and Robbie is literally like, the house is coming. And you're like, what the fuck? Like, just like things you would never imagine anyone would ever say, you know? It just cracks me up. And then the house like implodes, like it folds in on itself. And Teague is like, what the fuck? He's standing on the street watching it happen. The neighbors are also watching it happen. Everything is fucked. The house was like throwing up flames and then it just collapses in on itself and disappears though. Like it basically folds itself into nothing. And so you're like, wow, that was special. So then they pull up to the Holiday Inn and you see him like going into their room. And Steve, they close the door for a second, and then all of a sudden the door opens again and the TV gets wheeled out, and he shuts the door and locks it on the TV. And that's the end of the movie. And the second movie, it's crazy because, like I said, Dana, her actress, dies in real life. She gets axe murdered. And so they just don't even address it. Like, they don't have any, like, I've only seen the second one once because that movie's dog shit. But I don't remember any scenes or any dialogue even talking about Dana, let alone talking about what happened to her. They just act like her character never existed. They don't recast her. They don't give you, like it was so funny because I was like, are they just going to not talk about her this whole movie? Yeah, they're just going to not talk about her the whole rest of the franchise. And I was like, all right, bet. I mean, she wasn't all that important of a character, but, like, it's kind of sad because, like, that's that actress's main claim to fame is this one time she was in this one cult classic horror movie. And they just never talk about her in the sequels. But the mom and the dad both return for the sequel. So do Carol Ann and Robbie. They have a new villain that is kind of like redacted and it retroactively explains the first one, kind of. And then they're also like, oh, by the way, Diane's mom is psychic, and Diane's a little psychic, and Carol Ann is super psychic, and that's why this stuff is happening. And so they're like, this cult is after Carol Ann. It's just really weird. It's just really weird, because it's like a century-old cult that is already dead is after Carol Ann, and you're like, man, it really sucks when the cult be coming at you from the afterlife. You weren't even part of that cult, bro. But like I said, that one's kind of dog shit, so like, everything I said just sounds like really crazy, because it is, because they were really stretching with that one. I have never seen the third one. However, I heard that it is actually decent compared to the third one. Apparently the ending's not great, but again, like I said, the studio demanded a reshoot after Carol Ann died, Heather O'Rourke died, so, and they kind of just phoned that in, so I don't know if that factored into it, or if it's dog shit because it was a studio decision and not the writers and directors decision. It's kind of iffy on that. A lot of studio demand reshoots are typically dog shit, to be honest, because studios are just stupid. They fucking suck. Usually a reshoot that's demanded by, like, the director or by test audiences is better, so, like, I don't know if it's just dog shit because they phoned it in, or if it's dog shit because it's what the studio wanted. But apparently that ending is dog shit. And the remake was not bad. I remember I've seen the remake. I definitely like the original better. I know there were some major changes in the remake. Like, Robbie's the one who goes into the closet to save his sister instead of the mom, which I always thought was a weird choice. Like, I still think that's a really weird choice. I also want to say, it's been so long, it's been like a decade since I've seen it, but I want to say it was also like the timeline of the movie took place like during the 2008 recession, so like the dad's jobless or something like that. So it's very different tonally, I think. There's still a lot of shots they reuse from the original, like a lot of those ideas, but then they go a completely different direction with it, and they show you what the other side looks like, which I think is a mistake. I just think you're never going to conjure anything scary enough in an American studio. You're just not. I think probably the freakiest was Talk to Me. Their version of the other side was pretty freaky. But typically it's not scary to reveal something like that, just because we can't really like fathom what that's like, I think. I think a lot of people don't have enough creativity or imagination, especially a studio. So I just don't think you're gonna do something that's scary enough, typically. But anyway, that's the lowdown on Poltergeist. Again, it's about the original, but I kind of did a little bit of an overview of the whole series. And then, of course, like the cursed aspect is always a very interesting topic. And it is, I mean, it's very sad and it's very morbid, but I think, I mean, if you're a horror movie fan, you're fascinated by that stuff. And if you want to learn more about that, there's actually a series on Shudder, SHUDDER.com, called Cursed Films, and they do an episode about Poltergeist, and they interview the third movie's director and everything, and so you get a little bit more detail on that if you're interested in that. That's where you can find it. But thank you very guys. Much listen. Jesus Christ. Let me try that again. Thanks very much, you guys, for listening. Appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully, I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing for my next one. I have a couple ideas, so just stay tuned for that. You can find me on YouTube, Beware the Moon Podcast. You can find me on Rumble, Beware the Moon Podcast. And you can find me on Twitter, @BewareMoon. Thanks, and stay safe out there, y'all.